The wail of sirens echoed through the emergency bay as paramedics swarmed the gurney, their movements a frantic ballet of desperation. 25 medical professionals had already tried and failed, their collective expertise rendered useless against the child's baffling symptoms. From the edge of the chaos, a low, steady voice cut through the noise. "You're treating it all wrong." The eruption of screams had shattered the peace of Lincoln Park Elementary's playground, like a lightning strike from a clear, blue sky. 7-year-old Lily Sterling had crumpled without a sound, her small frame seizing violently on the soft turf beside the swing set. Teachers sprinted towards her as the joyful shouts of children turned to cries of terror. Within moments, Principal Davis was administering chest compressions, while the school nurse frantically relayed information to a 911 operator, her voice cracking as she described a child in acute distress. "What's your ETA?" she pleaded, her eyes fixed on the terrifying bluish tint spreading across Lily's lips. 2 minutes, the dispatcher promised. Miles away, in a gleaming office atop the Sterling Enterprises Tower overlooking Lake Michigan, Arthur Sterling was finalizing the acquisition of his third biotech firm that quarter when his private line buzzed. His executive assistant never interrupted these meetings unless it was a matter of life or death. "Sir, it's about Lily." The color drained from Arthur's face. He dropped the call without a word to the stunned board members, already moving at a dead run for the elevator. His driver had the Rolls-Royce waiting at the curb by the time Arthur exploded through the building's marble lobby. Northwestern Memorial now. The first ambulance screamed onto the school grounds in 1 minute and 50 seconds. By that point, Lily's pulse was thready and her breathing dangerously shallow. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, establishing an IV line, connecting monitors, and pushing a cocktail of emergency drugs. None of it made a difference. The girl's condition only worsened as they carefully lifted her into the ambulance. Arthur's car skidded into the school's circular driveway just as the rear doors were swinging shut. "That's my daughter," he roared, leaving the luxury sedan abandoned and running. After a brief, tense hesitation, a paramedic waved him into the back of the vehicle. "Sir, we're giving her everything we've got," one of them said, but the words were just static to Arthur. His entire universe had contracted to the motionless figure of his daughter, an oxygen mask obscuring her pale face. He reached out and took her hand. It was cold, unnervingly so. "What happened?" Arthur asked, his voice a hollow whisper. "We don't know. The school said she was playing 1 minute and collapsed the next. Any known medical issues? Allergies?" "None," Arthur breathed. "She's never had anything worse than a cold." A sharp alarm blared from a monitor. Lily's heart rhythm was descending into chaos. "We have to go now," the lead medic shouted to the driver, and the ambulance lurched forward, its siren screaming into the Chicago afternoon. Arthur squeezed his daughter's hand, a silent prayer forming on his lips. "Please, not you too." Cancer had claimed his wife Eleanor 3 years prior, leaving him the sole parent to their only child. Lily was his reason for being, the center of his world. As the ambulance weaved through traffic, Arthur was already on the phone, his voice a cold, commanding instrument. Specialists from across the city were being summoned, their schedules cleared, their expertise demanded. Whatever this was, his fortune would conquer it. His fortune always conquered everything, except this time it seemed it couldn't. When they arrived at Northwestern Memorial, a team of 6 more paramedics and emergency physicians was waiting. Lily was rushed inside, surrounded by a phalanx of medical staff shouting acronyms and dosages that were meaningless to Arthur. A profound sense of helplessness washed over him, tightening his chest with every passing second. "Mr. Sterling." A nurse appeared at his elbow, her expression calm but urgent. "We need her medical history, anything you can think of." Arthur struggled to gather his thoughts. "She's the picture of health. Perfect checkups, all her shots, no allergies. She takes no medication." He raked a hand through his hair, his composure fraying. "This is impossible." Inside the trauma bay, the situation was spiraling. Lily's oxygen saturation was plummeting even with the ventilator. Her blood pressure was critically low. The chief resident called for one drug after another, but each was met with the same terrifying lack of response. "Get toxicology on the line," she ordered a junior doctor, "and page pediatric neurology, stat." Arthur paced the hallway outside, his phone a permanent fixture at his ear. Within half an hour, the corridors of the pediatric wing were crowded with the city's top medical minds. He had pulled in private practice gurus, university researchers, even a renowned immunologist who had been guest lecturing at the University of Chicago when Arthur's assistant tracked him down. His wealth and influence had brought them all here, but not one of them could offer an explanation for why Lily was slipping away. "Arthur?" His new wife, Isabella, hurried toward him, the clicks of her designer heels echoing on the polished floor. "I came as soon as I heard. What's happening? Is she—" "They have no idea," Arthur cut her off, his gaze fixed on the doors to the trauma bay. They had been married for just 8 months, a union born partly from his belief that Lily needed a maternal figure in her life. Isabella was elegant, charming, and had seemed to dote on the girl. Now her flawlessly applied makeup was a mask of appropriate concern, but Arthur was too consumed by his own terror to register the way her eyes kept darting toward the doctors, her focus on the drama rather than the child at its center. 2 hours bled into 3. A total of 25 medical professionals had now exhausted every conventional protocol in their arsenal. Lily was moved to the pediatric ICU, where Arthur could only watch through a pane of glass as more tubes and wires were attached to her small, still body. The most brilliant physicians in Chicago were baffled, and Arthur felt the very foundations of his world begin to crumble. "There's something we're missing, a key piece of the puzzle," murmured Dr. Evans, the head of pediatric critical care. "Could it be some kind of poison?" Isabella suggested, her voice laced with a slight theatrical tremor. The initial toxicology screen was still pending, but the symptoms didn't align with any common toxins. More tests were ordered, more specialists consulted. Still, Lily's condition continued its inexorable decline. Outside the hospital, a media circus was forming. The daughter of Arthur Sterling, the billionaire tycoon whose name was etched onto half the buildings in the Loop, was clinging to life. The city wanted to know what was happening. Inside, Arthur was oblivious to the cameras and reporters. His entire focus was on the wavering lines on the monitors, each dip in the rhythm of his daughter's heartbeat a physical blow. "I promised I'd always protect you," he whispered, pressing his hand against the cool glass. "You have to fight, Lily. Please, fight." By dusk, a crowd of onlookers had joined the media scrum outside the hospital, drawn by the tragic spectacle of the billionaire's dying child. Standing among them, a lone figure in a worn coat went unnoticed, observing the scene with an unusual, focused intensity. Inside, the medical team was growing desperate. Lily's organs were beginning to shut down. Arthur had greenlit every experimental treatment they could suggest, but nothing could halt the mysterious slide towards death. "Mr. Sterling?" Dr. Evans approached him, his face etched with the grim finality of a man delivering a death sentence. "We're out of options. We've exhausted every diagnostic path. Without knowing what we're fighting—" Arthur grabbed the front of the doctor's white coat. "Try something else. She's 7 years old." 2 security guards started forward, but Dr. Evans calmly waved them off. "We are doing everything humanly possible." Isabella placed a gentle hand on Arthur's arm. "Darling, perhaps we should start to prepare—" "Don't!" Arthur snarled, pulling away from her touch. "Don't you dare say that!" As the tension inside the ICU reached its breaking point, the figure outside made his move. The main entrance was a chaotic bottleneck of staff, media, and concerned family members. Slipping through was surprisingly easy for someone accustomed to being invisible. Hospital personnel were too preoccupied with the high-profile crisis to pay any mind to a tall, gaunt black man in a frayed army jacket, whose determined eyes missed nothing. Marcus Thorne had spent the last 3 years living on the streets of Chicago ever since a series of tragedies had dismantled his former life. With nothing left but the clothes on his back and the knowledge seared into his brain, he moved through the world as a ghost. The knowledge, however, was formidable. He clutched his only valued possession in his coat pocket, a battered field guide to medical toxicology, a relic from his time as a decorated Army combat medic. The corridor outside the PICU was a hive of frantic activity, all of it centered on the room where the city's best doctors were failing to save a rich man's daughter. Marcus watched from the periphery, analyzing the controlled panic with a chillingly calm detachment. He observed the readouts on the monitors visible through the doorway, the drugs being pushed through the IV, the looks of utter bafflement on the faces of the specialists. Something was fundamentally wrong with their approach. Inside the room, another alarm shrieked. Lily's blood pressure had cratered again. A nurse injected yet another medication into her line. "We have to try aggressive chelation," someone suggested, a last-ditch effort. "That will kill her," a deep voice stated from the doorway. The entire medical team froze, turning as one. A homeless man stood there, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn coat, his gaze locked on the monitors. "Who the hell are you?" Dr. Evans demanded, his face flushing with anger. "Security!" Marcus stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving the readouts. "You're accelerating the reaction." 2 guards appeared behind him, their hands reaching for his arms. "Wait," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the tension. Something in the man's absolute certainty had pierced his fog of grief. "What do you mean you're making it worse?" Marcus pointed a long, steady finger at the IV bag. "That cocktail of vasopressors is creating a synergistic toxicity with the agent already in her system. You're treating the symptoms, not the cause." The room was utterly silent. Dr. Evans looked outraged. "Sir, this is a secure area. You need to leave now." "Her pupils are asymmetrical," Marcus continued, stepping closer to Lily's bed despite the guard's attempts to block him. "There is a slight tremor in her right hand. Even unconscious, you can see a specific discoloration around her nail beds." He looked directly at Arthur, his gaze clear and unflinching. This wasn't a sudden illness. The guards looked to Dr. Evans for their cue, but Arthur moved between them and the stranger. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus met his desperate eyes. "Someone has been poisoning her, and everything you're doing is inadvertently helping it along." The accusation detonated in the sterile air. Isabella let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest. The medical team exchanged looks that ranged from fury to a flicker of uncomfortable doubt. "That's absurd," Dr. Evans snapped. "Security, get him out of here." Arthur held up a hand, stopping them cold. "Wait." He turned to Marcus, his eyes searching the man's weathered face. "How can you possibly know any of this?" "The symptoms are a classic presentation for chronic heavy metal poisoning, but with a twist," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the hostility surrounding him. "The tremors, the specific cardiac arrhythmia, the dermatological signs, it's all textbook, but it's been masked. Someone's been administering it in small, escalating doses over a period of weeks, probably disguised in something she consumes daily." Dr. Chen, the chief toxicologist, frowned. "We ran a heavy metal panel including lead and arsenic. The results were negative." "Because you used a standard screen," Marcus replied without hesitation. "This isn't a simple compound. It's been chelated to a protein binder. It evades standard detection. You need to run a differential spectrography and administer a Prussian blue compound immediately." The room erupted. Objections flew from every corner. Words like unorthodox and dangerous were thrown around. Arthur looked from the assembled experts to this strange, confident man who had appeared from nowhere. "Run the test," he commanded. "Now." Dr. Chen hesitated. "Mr. Sterling, the protocol he's suggesting is highly unconventional. There's no clinical basis. My daughter is dying, Arthur roared, his voice echoing in the corridor. Run the damn test. While the lab team reluctantly scrambled to prepare the new analysis, Marcus moved to Lily's bedside. He gently examined her fingernails, the faint lines on her gums, the pattern of veins visible beneath her eyelids. How do you know all this? Arthur asked quietly. Marcus didn't look up from his examination. I've seen it before, different context, same chemistry. He finally met Arthur's gaze. My name is Marcus Thorne. I was a senior combat medic. We were taught to look for the patterns that don't fit, the things that aren't supposed to be there. There was an intelligence in his eyes that Arthur recognized, the same sharp analytical focus he saw in his own mirror during a hostile takeover. But this man's intelligence was raw, honed by experiences Arthur could barely imagine. The results from the new test came back in under 20 minutes. A hush fell over the room as Dr. Chen stared at the report, the blood draining from his face. Positive, he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Positive for a thallium variant, chelated just like he said. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus. He showed no sign of triumph. Instead, he pointed at the clock on the wall. You've wasted 20 minutes. She needs the Prussian blue, and you need to counteract the other drugs before they interfere with the antidote. Evans, shaken but professional, immediately began issuing a new set of orders. The hospital pharmacy raced to find the rarely used antidote. Isabella, who had been strangely silent, suddenly spoke up. This is insane. You're taking medical advice from a homeless man? He could be the one who did this to Lily. This has to be some kind of mistake. Marcus's eyes flickered to Isabella for a brief moment, taking in her expensive suit, the way she stood just a little too far from Arthur, the tension in her jaw. He said nothing, turning his attention back to the child on the bed. As the medical team prepared the antidote, Arthur pulled Marcus aside. How did you know to come here? Who are you really? Marcus shrugged, his gaze distant. I saw the news on a TV in a shop window. They said 25 of the best doctors were stumped. I figured they must be asking the wrong questions. You're not just some medic, Arthur pressed. No, Marcus agreed quietly. I'm not. The next 12 hours turned the pediatric ICU into a battlefield, with death on one side and a treatment protocol designed by a homeless veteran on the other. Despite their initial profound skepticism, the medical team had no choice but to follow Marcus's guidance after the thallium confirmation shattered their own diagnostic assumptions. The Prussian blue was administered, dialysis was started with modified filters, and Lily's medication regimen was completely overhauled to prevent catastrophic interactions. Arthur never left the room, his attention split between the monitors displaying his daughter's vital signs and the quiet, authoritative man who spoke about complex toxicology as if he were discussing the weather. Isabella also remained, her expression a perfect portrait of concern, though something about it felt rehearsed, a detail that only Marcus seemed to register. The first positive indicators should manifest within 3 hours, Marcus explained, his voice low and steady, as he observed the monitors from a chair he'd pulled to Lily's bedside. Her heart rate should be the first thing to stabilize, followed by an improvement in kidney function. And if that doesn't happen? Arthur asked, his voice raw from hours of unshed tears. Marcus met his gaze directly. Then we moved to the next contingency. His unwavering confidence was both unnerving and the only thing keeping Arthur from collapsing. This man, with his frayed coat and haunted eyes, possessed a certainty that 25 of the city's most credentialed doctors could not muster. Arthur found himself placing his complete trust in him, without fully understanding why. At the 4-hour mark, the first sign of hope appeared. The frantic beeping of the cardiac monitor slowed, settling into a stable, regular rhythm. By hour 6, Lily's oxygen levels began to creep upward. Dr. Evans, who had been the most vocal in his opposition to Marcus's intervention, now deferred to him with a quiet, grudging respect. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked during a brief lull in the activity. Marcus shrugged. "The Army sends you to a lot of schools. You read a lot of manuals. You see things." "But this level of detail?" Dr. Chen pressed, still in disbelief. Page 822 of the Field Guide to Chemical and Biological Agents, 7th edition, describes the use of chelated heavy metals as covert agents, including a case study from a conflict in the Balkans where it was used to bypass standard NATO detection protocols. Marcus recited from memory, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The paper you're probably thinking of, by Dr. Abramson on modified detection methods, was published in the Journal of Military Medicine, Volume 178, Issue 4. The two doctors exchanged a look of pure astonishment. As dawn broke over the Chicago skyline, Lily's improvement was undeniable. The bluish tint had receded from her skin, her vital signs were strengthening, and the cacophony of critical alarms on her monitors had fallen silent. By mid-morning she was stable enough for Arthur to step into the hallway with Dr. Evans and the hospital administrator. "The police have to be notified," the administrator said gravely, "if this was a deliberate act of poisoning." "I'm aware," Arthur cut in, his voice like ice. "My head of security is already looking into how this could have happened, who had access to my daughter." Isabella joined them, having excused herself just moments earlier. "This is a waking nightmare. Who could possibly want to harm our sweet girl?" Marcus, who had stepped out to get a cup of water, paused in the hallway, overhearing Isabella's choice of words. "Our sweet girl." The possessive pronoun sounded forced, unnatural. He watched her perfectly composed face, noting the microscopic clenching of her jaw, not the expression of a worried parent, but something else entirely. Back in Lily's room, Marcus noticed something he had overlooked in the initial chaos. Carefully reaching under the sleeping child's pillow, he pulled out a small, hand-crafted wooden music box, examining it with narrowed eyes. "What are you doing with that?" Isabella asked sharply from the doorway. Marcus turned, the music box resting in his palm. "This seems to be her favorite." "Of course it is," Isabella replied, her tone softening. "She can't sleep without it. I had her nanny bring it from home yesterday." Marcus nodded slowly, turning the object over in his hands. "Interesting." "Put it back," Isabella commanded, her voice hardening again as she stepped into the room. "You have no right to touch her things." Marcus complied, but not before he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible stain near the winding key on the bottom of the box, exactly where a child might hold it while drifting off to sleep. As Lily's condition continued to stabilize, the hospital room morphed into a makeshift command center. Arthur's private security team, led by a sharp-eyed former FBI agent named David Cole, arrived and began coordinating with Chicago police detectives. The room hummed with quiet, intense conversations while Lily slept, her breathing finally deep and natural. Marcus remained, despite several polite but firm suggestions, that he should be on his way. He sat in a corner, a silent observer, taking in every detail: the investigators, the doctors, the nurses, and especially Isabella, whose mask of concerned grief occasionally slipped when she believed no one was watching. "The poison was administered over time," Marcus explained when Cole questioned him. "Small amounts gradually increased. That's why she appeared healthy until her system reached a tipping point and collapsed." Cole, a man who trusted evidence over intuition, found himself listening intently to the homeless veteran. How would someone manage that? Food, drink, multiple vectors would be the most effective way to avoid detection, Marcus replied. But it would require consistent, daily access, someone very close to her. The implication was a palpable weight in the room. Cole's gaze flickered briefly toward Isabella, who was conferring with a detective across the room. "We're collecting samples from the Sterling residence," Cole said quietly. "Food, drinks, lotions, everything Lily might have touched." Marcus nodded toward the music box, which was now back on the bedside table. "Did you test that?" Cole followed his gaze. "The music box? No, not yet." "You should," Marcus said simply, then fell silent as Isabella approached them. "Arthur is arranging for you to have a room at the Peninsula," Isabella told Marcus, her smile tight and forced. "You've been a tremendous help, but you must be exhausted. You need a proper place to rest." Before Marcus could respond, Arthur returned from a call, the change in his demeanor stark. The desperate father had been replaced by the ruthless CEO. His eyes were sharp, his posture commanding. "Marcus stays here, if he wants to," he stated flatly. "And I want that music box sent to the lab for immediate analysis," he added to Cole, who nodded without question. Isabella's smile vanished. "The music box? Arthur, that's just a toy. Lily's had it for years." "Exactly," Arthur replied. "Test it, and test everything else from our home, especially the custom-blended herbal tea you've been insisting she drink every night, Isabella." The accusation, though subtle, was as clear as a gunshot. Isabella's perfect composure fractured for a split second before she recovered. "You can't possibly think I would have anything to do with this. I love Lily like she's my own. I don't know what to think anymore," Arthur said, his voice dangerously cold. "But I promise you, I will find out exactly what happened to my daughter." Isabella's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to argue, but a small, weak voice from the bed cut her off. "Daddy?" The room went still. Lily's eyes were open, unfocused, but conscious. Arthur was at her side in an instant, his hand enveloping hers. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Lily blinked slowly, her gaze drifting around the room. It passed over Marcus without recognition before settling on Isabella. The reaction was almost imperceptible, a slight tensing of her fingers in Arthur's hand, a flicker of fear in her eyes. Marcus saw it. So did Cole. "Where's my music box?" Lily whispered. Isabella started forward, reaching for the toy. "Right here, darling. Don't touch it," Arthur commanded, his voice like steel, stopping her in her tracks. He turned back to his daughter, his tone softening. "It needs to be cleaned, sweetheart. It'll be back soon." Cole quietly took the music box and placed it in an evidence bag. Isabella watched, her composure finally shattering. "This is insane," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "I have done nothing but love and care for this family." Marcus, still observing from his corner, finally spoke, his voice low but carrying across the room. "When did you start planning it? Before you married him or after?" All heads turned toward him. Isabella's face hardened into a mask of fury. "I don't know what this man is implying, but I will not be accused by some vagrant." "Marcus," Arthur warned, "this isn't the time." "It is," Marcus insisted, standing up, "because if she gets the chance, she will try again." The accusation hung in the air, electric and undeniable. Isabella's expression cycled through shock, outrage, and then something colder, more calculating, before settling into indignant denial. "This is preposterous," she said, looking to Arthur for support. "You can't seriously believe this." Arthur's face was an unreadable mask of stone. "I believe in evidence, Isabella, and we will have it soon." Detective Ramirez stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling, perhaps you could come with us to answer a few questions." "I'm not going anywhere," Isabella insisted, her voice rising. "This is a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on Isabella, his gaze analytical and piercing. "The music box was a clever delivery system," he said quietly. "A porous wood, a slow-absorbing toxin applied to the winding key. A child holds it every night before bed, slow, consistent, almost impossible to detect." Isabella's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. "You can't prove a thing." "The lab will," Cole stated, already on his phone, arranging for the expedited testing of the music box. A tense silence descended, broken only by the steady, reassuring beep of Lily's heart monitor. The little girl had drifted back into a peaceful sleep, oblivious to the quiet implosion of her family. A nurse entered to check Lily's IV, momentarily breaking the tension. As she worked, Marcus moved closer, watching the procedure with his usual focused intensity. You said you were a medic? Arthur asked Marcus quietly, deliberately shifting the focus. In the Army? Marcus nodded, his eyes on Lily. For 12 years, special operations. What happened? A shadow passed over Marcus's face. I came home. My wife and daughter... There was an accident, a drunk driver. He said it with a practiced flatness, the words worn smooth by time and grief. After that, things fell apart. The world didn't make sense anymore. Arthur absorbed this, a pang of shared loss, creating an unexpected connection between the billionaire and the homeless man. And no one helped you? A bitter, humorless smile touched Marcus's lips. Plenty of people offered pamphlets. I wasn't what they were looking for. Too broken, too quiet, too angry. Before Arthur could respond, his phone vibrated. It was Cole. The lab had preliminary results from the items taken from the Sterling penthouse. His face grew dark as he listened. Are you certain? He asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Run it again. He ended the call and turned to Isabella, who took an involuntary step back. The custom-blended herbal tea you had specially made for Lily. The one you said was for calm sleep. It's laced with a thallium compound. Isabella's composure finally disintegrated. That's impossible. I would never... And your fingerprints are the only ones on the canister, Arthur continued, his voice like chipping ice. Along with the lotion in her bathroom and, yes, the winding key of her music box. The color drained from Isabella's face. For a moment, she seemed poised to continue the charade. Then, something inside her snapped, the mask of the loving stepmother falling away to reveal the cold ambition beneath. You have no idea what it's like, she hissed, her voice transformed, hard and venomous. To live in your world, orbiting your life, but never truly being a part of it. It was always Eleanor this and Eleanor that. How Eleanor would have decorated for the holidays. The way Eleanor used to make Lily's lunch, Detective Ramirez signaled to the uniformed officers by the door. So you tried to murder my daughter because you were jealous of my dead wife? Isabella let out a brittle, ugly laugh. Murder? Don't be so dramatic, Arthur. Not murder. Just make her sick. Sick enough to need me. Sick enough that I could be the one to nurse her back to health. The one who never left her side. The devoted stepmother, finally earning her place. The hero. The room was deathly still. Arthur's face was a canvas of shock and revulsion. Detective Ramirez nodded to the officers, who moved forward. Isabella Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Isabella's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. Then, with a sudden, shocking burst of speed, she lunged toward Lily's bed. If I can't have this family, no one can. Everything happened at once. Cole shouted. Arthur moved to intercept her, but it was Marcus who reacted fastest. He threw himself between Isabella and the sleeping child, his larger body absorbing the impact of her desperate charge. Isabella stumbled back, and something small and sharp flashed in her hand, a syringe she'd pulled from her designer handbag. Cole tackled her before she could recover, wrestling her to the ground. The syringe skittered across the floor as the officers subdued her. Marcus calmly picked it up, examining it with a practiced eye. Potassium chloride, he said, his voice steady, would have stopped her heart in seconds. Now in handcuffs, Isabella locked eyes with Arthur, her face contorted with hate. You never loved me. You never even saw me. This is your fault. As the police led the screaming, struggling Isabella away, Marcus stood by Lily's bed, his hand resting protectively near her head. The unlikely bond between the billionaire's daughter and the homeless hero was now sealed in a crucible of violence and salvation. 3 days later, Lily was sitting up in bed, the color returning to her cheeks as her body, guided by Marcus's treatment protocol, purged the last vestiges of the poison. Arthur had not left her side, transforming a corner of the hospital suite into a remote office from which he managed his global empire. Marcus had remained as well, a quiet, watchful presence that no one, not even the hospital staff, questioned anymore. Isabella's arrest was a media firestorm. The story of the beautiful, sociopathic stepmother who poisoned her stepdaughter for attention was a sensation. Arthur's PR team worked around the clock to insulate Lily from the sordid details, but the damage to the sterling name was incalculable. "The music box is all clean now," Arthur told Lily, who was working on a complex Lego model of the solar system that Marcus had found for her in the hospital gift shop. "Good as new." Lily shook her head, her expression solemn. "I don't want it back." "I understand, sweetheart," Arthur said, exchanging a look with Dr. Evans, who was reviewing Lily's latest charts. "Her recovery is nothing short of miraculous," the doctor commented. "Another few days, and she can go home." Home. The word hung in the air, tainted and heavy. Home was the place where Lily had been systematically poisoned. Home was now a crime scene, filled with memories of betrayal. "We're not going back there," Arthur stated, his voice firm. "We'll stay at the lake house for a while, then we'll find somewhere new." Dr. Evans nodded in understanding. "A fresh start is probably for the best." Marcus, who had been silently reading a medical journal he'd borrowed from the nurse's station, looked up. He said nothing, but Arthur, who was becoming attuned to the man's subtle expressions, noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. Later, when Lily was napping and the doctors had gone, Arthur approached him. "What happens to you now, Marcus?" Marcus shrugged, not looking up from his journal. "I go back. Nothing changes." "Everything has changed," Arthur countered. "You saved my daughter's life when 25 of the best doctors in the city were letting her die. You saw what no one else could see." "I notice things," Marcus said simply. "It's how my brain is wired." "It's a gift," Arthur corrected him. "You're a gifted man." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes guarded. He'd heard praise before, usually followed by pity or a request he couldn't fulfill. "Thank you for the meals," he said, deflecting the compliment. Arthur sat in the chair opposite him, choosing his words with care. "I've been speaking with Dr. Evans. He says Lily might have some lingering effects, potential kidney damage, neurological symptoms that could surface later." Marcus nodded. "Thallium poisoning can have a long tail. She'll need careful, specialized monitoring for years." "Exactly," Arthur agreed. "She'll need the best care available, someone who truly understands what was done to her, who can spot the subtle signs that others might miss." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Sterling?" The question, so direct and devoid of deference, made Arthur respect him even more. "I'm offering you a new life, Marcus." The journal slipped from Marcus's fingers, landing softly on the hospital blanket. For the first time, he looked utterly lost, unable to process what he was hearing. "I don't understand." "I want you to come with us," Arthur said carefully, "to the lake house, and then wherever we go next. I want you to be Lily's personal medical consultant, to oversee her recovery, to ensure she has the best possible long-term care. I'll provide a home, a salary, whatever resources you need to get back on your feet. We can get your records unsealed, help you get your certifications back. Whatever it takes." Marcus's mind, so quick to analyze complex medical data, struggled to process this. He looked for the catch, the angle, the inevitable price for such an offer. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice rough with a vulnerability he rarely showed. Arthur answered without hesitation. "Because you did what no one else could. Because you put your own body between my daughter and a woman with a syringe. Because you deserve a hell of a lot more than what the world has given you." He paused, his voice softening. "And because my daughter is alive today because of you. That's a debt I can never fully repay, but I have to try." Marcus stared at him, searching his face for any hint of pity or insincerity. He found none. All he saw was the profound, unshakable gratitude of a father. "What does Lily think?" he asked quietly. Arthur smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes for the first time in days. "Why don't you ask her? She's been pretending to be asleep for the last 5 minutes." On cue, Lily's eyes popped open, a guilty grin spreading across her face. "I want Marcus to stay," she announced, with the clear, decisive authority of a 7-year-old. "He's super smart and he can help me with my biology homework." Despite himself, a low chuckle escaped Marcus's throat, a sound so unfamiliar it surprised even him. "I'm not very good at being normal," he warned them both. "Normal is overrated," Arthur replied. "We stopped being normal the day Isabella walked into our lives. It's time we tried something different." Later that afternoon, Arthur's legal team began the complex process of creating a position and a life for Marcus Thorne. By evening, news had leaked to the press that billionaire Arthur Sterling had hired the homeless hero who saved his daughter. By nightfall, the camera crews had once again surrounded Northwestern Memorial, this time to capture a very different kind of Sterling family drama. The media frenzy surrounding the Sterlings intensified over the next week. From Skid Row to Sterling Estate. "Billionaire hires homeless hero," screamed the headlines. Reporters dug into Marcus's past, unearthing the story of a highly decorated combat medic, a devoted husband and father whose life had been shattered by a drunk driver. They chronicled his subsequent struggle with grief and PTSD, and his slow, tragic slide into homelessness. Arthur's security team formed an impenetrable shield around Lily's hospital room, but Marcus's former life on the streets was now public domain. "We need to get him out of the city," Arthur told Cole, after learning that a tabloid had offered a 5-figure sum to any of Marcus's former street contacts for a story. "He's not safe from this." Within hours, Marcus's few belongings, a worn rucksack, a bedroll, and his precious toxicology manual were discreetly collected and brought to the hospital. The legal and financial arrangements, which would normally take months, were executed with breathtaking speed thanks to Arthur's army of lawyers and accountants. A trust was established, a contract drawn up, and a new identity, free from the stigma of his recent past, was being constructed. He and Lily had formed an unlikely but powerful bond. They would spend hours discussing science and medicine at a level that left the nursing staff bewildered. Lily's insatiable curiosity was a perfect match for Marcus's deep well of knowledge. "She's intellectually gifted," Marcus explained to Arthur one evening as Lily slept. "Her mind sees connections and patterns that most adults miss." Arthur nodded thoughtfully. "Eleanor, her mother, was brilliant, a research scientist at Fermilab. Lily gets that from her." He trailed off, the old wound still tender. "Cancer," Marcus said, not as a question. He had read about it in the media storm. Her work on particle physics was groundbreaking. Arthur studied the quiet, intense man who somehow knew about his late wife's esoteric research. "Yes, it was. I've never had the scientific background to really nurture that side of Lily." "I can help with that," Marcus offered, the words hesitant, unused to offering anything but emergency aid. "With her education, I mean." "I'm counting on it," Arthur replied with a small smile. 10 days after Isabella's arrest, Lily was finally discharged. To evade the media circus, Cole orchestrated an elaborate decoy operation, while Arthur, Lily, and Marcus were secretly transported by helicopter from the hospital roof to a private airfield outside the city. By nightfall, they had arrived at the Sterling summer estate on the shores of Lake Geneva, a sprawling, secluded property protected by state-of-the-art security and acres of private woodland. For Marcus, who had spent the last 3 years sleeping in shelters or under bridges, the estate was an overwhelming sensory shock. The guest wing he was given was larger than any apartment he had ever lived in. The closet was filled with new clothes, all in his size. An adjoining study was stocked with medical textbooks, scientific journals, and the latest computer technology. "Is this all for me?" he asked Arthur, his voice rough, unable to hide his disbelief. "You saved my daughter's life," Arthur replied simply. "There's nothing I would not give you." That night, unable to sleep in the vast silent space of his new room, Marcus wandered through the moonlit corridors of the massive house. He found himself drawn to the light spilling from Arthur's study, where the billionaire sat reviewing documents despite the late hour. "Can't sleep?" Arthur asked, without looking up. Marcus shook his head, then realized the man couldn't see the gesture. "It's too quiet, too big." Arthur set his work aside. It takes time to adjust to change, even when it's for the better. "What if I can't?" Marcus asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at him since they'd left the hospital. "What if I'm too damaged to be here, to be part of this?" Arthur considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Eleanor used to say that a family isn't a perfect puzzle with pieces that fit seamlessly. It's a mosaic made of broken pieces that create something new and beautiful precisely because of their jagged edges. Marcus absorbed this, first analytically, then with a flicker of emotional understanding. "You really think this can work? The three of us?" "I know it can," Arthur replied with quiet certainty, "but it will require patience and time." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Speaking of which, there's something we need to discuss." Marcus sat on the edge of the chair, instantly on guard. "Is something wrong with Lily?" "No, nothing like that," Arthur assured him. "It's about you. Your capabilities are extraordinary, Marcus. You need a purpose beyond just monitoring Lily." "I know," he said, simply stating a fact. "Being idle is—" He struggled for a word. "A kind of hell," Arthur finished for him, his voice filled with understanding. Marcus nodded, relieved. "I've had my team looking into options," Arthur continued. "We can fund your return to school, help you get your MD. We can set up a foundation in your name to help other veterans who've fallen through the cracks. Or you could have a more direct role at Sterling Enterprises. Our biotech division could desperately use a mind like yours to evaluate new research and potential acquisitions." He leaned forward. "The choice is yours, but there's one condition." Marcus tensed, waiting for the inevitable catch. "You also have to let us help you heal," Arthur said gently. "To work with the best therapists, to deal with the trauma you've endured, to learn how to live again, not just survive." Of all the conditions Marcus might have imagined, this was the most unexpected. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Neither do I," Arthur confessed, "but I think Lily might. She's exceptional in her own way, but she's never forgotten how to be a child. She still finds joy in things." He paused. "Perhaps you can teach each other. She learns from your knowledge, you learn from her light." Marcus considered the proposal with the same focused intensity he applied to a complex diagnosis. "I'll try," he finally agreed, "but I can't promise I'll succeed." Arthur smiled. "That's all anyone can ask." As Marcus returned to his wing, feeling a fragile sense of peace for the first time in years, he didn't realize that across the house, Lily was also lying awake, equally uncertain about the future, but feeling safe and secure for the first time since her mother's death, comforted by the presence of the quiet, sad-eyed man who had become her guardian angel. Summer bled into fall across the Wisconsin landscape, painting the forests around the lake in hues of fire and gold. 3 months had passed since the traumatic events in Chicago. Isabella remained in custody, awaiting a trial that was already a foregone conclusion. Her legal team was desperately trying to negotiate a plea bargain as the mountain of evidence against her grew insurmountable. The Lake Geneva estate had become a true sanctuary, not just for Lily's physical recovery, but for the healing of the deep emotional wounds all three of them carried. Arthur had dramatically scaled back his corporate responsibilities, delegating daily operations to his most trusted executives, and prioritizing time with Lily and Marcus over acquisitions and board meetings for the first time in his career. Marcus's transition was a slow, arduous process. He began twice-weekly sessions with a renowned trauma therapist Arthur had flown in from Johns Hopkins. He started online courses, dipping his toes back into the world of academic medicine. Most importantly, he became a constant, steady presence in Lily's life. He was her tutor, her medical supervisor, and, unexpectedly, her friend. He never treated her like a fragile patient, but as an intellectual peer, a distinction Lily cherished. The promised tutors for Lily also arrived, but they often left their sessions looking more bewildered than their student. Lily's intellect consistently outstripped their lesson plans, especially in the hard sciences. By October, it was Marcus who had taken over the bulk of her advanced science education, designing a curriculum that challenged and engaged her in a way no professional educator had managed. But as Arthur had insisted, Marcus also began the more difficult work of rediscovering life. Lily proved to be an excellent, if unwitting, teacher. She introduced him to the simple joy of skipping stones across the glassy surface of the lake, of building elaborate sandcastles, of flying a kite in the crisp autumn air. Marcus approached each activity with a grim, methodical focus, analyzing wind vectors and structural integrity, until Lily would inevitably drag him away from his overthinking and into the simple pleasure of the moment. "Not everything is a problem to be solved, Marcus," she explained one afternoon as they searched for colorful autumn leaves. "Sometimes you just have to be in it." Marcus found this concept both alien and deeply compelling. He had spent his entire adult life solving one problem after another, in the field, in the hospital, on the streets. Learning to simply exist without a mission was his greatest challenge. Meanwhile, Lily blossomed under Marcus's guidance. Her natural scientific curiosity, which had been understimulated, exploded into life. Together they converted a boathouse on the property into a state-of-the-art laboratory, a project funded with unrestrained enthusiasm by Arthur. Their collaborative experiments produced insights that even impressed Lily's team of specialists during her monthly follow-up visits. The physical healing was far more straightforward than the emotional. Lily still woke from nightmares, her screams echoing through the silent house. On those nights it was Marcus who would appear in her doorway, not with platitudes or empty comforts, but with a glass of water and a quiet, steady presence. He would sit with her, sometimes talking about cellular biology in a low, calming monotone, until the terror receded and she could sleep again. Their shared trauma had forged a bond that transcended their assigned roles. They were fellow survivors, protectors of each other's scars. Arthur watched their relationship deepen with a mixture of gratitude and concern. While their connection was undeniably healing for both of them, he worried about their continued isolation from the outside world. Neither showed any interest in developing relationships outside of their small, self-contained unit. After consulting with Lily's child psychologist, he began to gently introduce opportunities for wider social engagement. There's a Young Innovators Science Fair at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago next month, he mentioned casually over dinner one evening. 3 days with workshops led by university professors for gifted students. Lily's interest was immediately piqued, but Marcus's expression became guarded. "I'm not ready for the city," he said, his voice flat. "That was before," Arthur replied gently. "Things are different now." "I'm different," Marcus countered. "I always will be." "Different doesn't mean you have to be alone," Lily interjected, with a wisdom that belied her years. "We could go together. I'll stay with you if it gets to be too much." Marcus's resistance faltered at the simple, earnest offer of solidarity from the child whose life he had saved. "You'd do that for me?" "Duh," Lily replied with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old. "You're my Marcus. That's what family does." The word family still sent a strange, warm ache through Marcus's chest every time he heard it. 3 months was not enough to erase 3 years of brutal survival. A part of him was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Arthur to decide he wasn't worth the trouble, for Lily to grow tired of his quiet moods and the ghosts that still haunted his eyes. "We'll try it," he finally agreed, more for Lily's sake than his own. "But if it gets bad, we leave, no questions asked." "Achida, deal," both Lily and Arthur answered at once, exchanging a subtle, triumphant glance. Later that night, as a cold autumn wind swept across the lake, Marcus stood at the window of his study, staring out at the dark, churning water. For the first time in years, he found himself contemplating a future that wasn't solely defined by getting through the next 24 hours. It was a future that held the possibility of purpose, of connection, of something beyond mere existence. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. On his desk lay an acceptance letter from an online program at Stanford University for a master's in biotechnology, a program typically reserved for students with extensive research backgrounds. Arthur's team had submitted an application on his behalf, highlighting his unconventional but profound expertise. Marcus hadn't told Arthur about the acceptance yet, uncertain how to balance this potential new path with his commitment to Lily and the fragile sense of belonging he had found with this strange, broken family. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching a textbook on astrophysics. "I don't get the part about gravitational lensing," she admitted, a sheepish look on her face. "Can you help?" An unexpected smile formed on Marcus's lips. Of course," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "That's what family does, right?" Lily's answering grin held all the certainty that Marcus still lacked. As they settled onto the window seat with the textbook between them, Marcus realized that perhaps his most important education was only just beginning. It was not about learning biotechnology or advanced medicine, but about learning how to belong. Outside, the autumn wind continued to reshape the shoreline, just as unexpected tragedy had reshaped 3 separate, broken lives into something new, something whole, something that was beginning to feel, against all odds, like a family.